right, so I'm just going to kick off just with our acknowledgement of country. I'll change my slides. I'm actually just going to close my window whilst some construction occurs next door. Sorry about that. We acknowledge that country for Indigenous peoples is an interconnected set of ancient and sophisticated relationships. The University of Wollongong in Australia spreads across many interrelated Aboriginal countries that are bound by this sacred landscape and intimate relationships with that landscape since creation. From Sydney to Southern Highlands to the South Coast, from freshwater to bitter water to salt, from city to rural. The University of Wollongong acknowledges the custodianship of the Aboriginal peoples of this place and space that has kept alive the relationships between all living things. The University of Wollongong acknowledges the devastating impact of colonisation on our campus's footprint. Oh, sorry. And commits ourselves to truth-telling, healing, research and education. I actually love saying that acknowledgement before each meeting this week. And hopefully it's more getting committed to memory each time. So I'm hopefully my goal at the end of the year is that I don't have to read it, which would be nice, then make it a bit more meaningful. So today we are very, very fortunate in our second last session for the day to welcome George Takacs and Jonathan Knott with us. And I guess it's probably one of those really practical sessions where we can think about what we can take away from our own homes and households perspective. So George will be sharing a bit about his personal experience and knowledges in ways we can reduce emissions and save money in our homes. And then Jonathan will be talking about more on the battery side of things, how to assess our needs and the different technologies that are available at the moment in this very topic space. So really looking forward and thank them for their time. And as you go through, please, hopefully we'll make this quite an informal session. And if, George, please, if people ask questions just in the chat or when you get to the end of the presentation, then we can ask questions. So yeah, hand it over to you, George. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Belinda. And it's a real pleasure to be participating again in Global Climate Change Week, particularly being joined in this presentation by Jonathan Knott, who's a student that I can remember from, Jonathan can probably tell you how long ago it was, but it was probably around a decade or so ago. And hopefully our two presentations will mesh very well together. So I'm going to be talking about the energy transition that our household has undergone over the last about 18 years, I suppose, and some of the decisions we made, which turned out to be bad decisions and we had to undo, and talk about where we're at now. But essentially, it's going to be a story about how we are now living with about 95% independence from the electricity grid using solar and batteries. So I might start sharing my screen and I'll go through some slides with a few pictures there. And hopefully this will work better than it did the other day. And I might move this over to here. Yeah, so hopefully you can now see Leah's.
Yep, we can see that, George.
So really this is what my talk is about. It's about this idea of electrifying everything. And the phrase electrify everything is a phrase which Saul Griffiths, who's also an Illawarra resident when he's in Australia, living up in Austinmere, has really brought to the forefront in recent weeks. But the idea of electrifying everything goes back quite a long way. Beyond Zero Emissions, which is an organisation which started in Victoria, they started pushing this over a decade ago, that the way to decarbonise the economy was to electrify as many energy users as you could at the same time as you decarbonise your electricity supply. So I'll be talking about how we've done that in our household, but the important thing is, I suppose, that this is to reduce emissions, but at the same time, it can save you money. And that's a thing that I think a lot of people don't appreciate. Some of the things I'll be talking about are things that won't save you money, but they will reduce your emissions. And so really the choice is yours as to how far you're willing to go to reduce your emissions. But certainly you can reduce your emissions and save money at the same time. So I might start off with the summary. So for those who are time poor, this is what's on the final slide. So the first point, you can reduce emissions, save money, and you can have a better quality of life doing this. If you want to reduce your emissions in the cheapest way, and so these are things that either cost you nothing or even save you money, and reduce hot water usage and reduce car usage. Heating water is a major energy user in the home. And even if you can't afford to go solar or do any of the other things, if you simply reduce your hot water usage, you're reducing your energy usage quite considerably and you're saving money. At the same time, if you reduce car usage, then that's another very effective way of reducing emissions and saving money. If you already have gas in your home, and a lot of people do, they have gas for heating, they can have gas for hot water, they can have gas for cooking, and we did have 2 of those 3. You can actually save money by getting rid of it, replacing the gas devices with heat pumps. So your gas hot water heater can become an electric heat pump hot water heater. If you're using gas for space heating, you can replace that with a reverse cycle air conditioner, which is a heat pump. And then if you supply that electricity with solar, you'll be reducing emissions as well as saving money. The nice thing about solar PV, at least if you can use it yourself in your own home, the real cost to you of generating that electricity is less than 1/4 of the cost of buying electricity from the grid. So typically if you're buying electricity from the grid, you're paying maybe 27 or 28 cents per kilowatt hour. When you work out the real cost of putting solar on your roof and generating energy yourself, if you can use that energy, it's typically costing you 5, 6 or 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So less than 1/4, maybe even less than 1/5. If you've got solar and you have a heat pump or water heater, the nice thing about most heat pumps is they have a timer function on them, so you can control when they don't heat up. And so you can use a thing called the blockout function on that heat pump unit to tell it not to heat up until 9 o'clock in the morning or whatever time your solar PV starts to generate sufficient energy. And so you can run that entirely off your solar. And I'll show you some of the output from our Tesla app later on, showing you how that works. And then the final point, if you're thinking about batteries and you think you're going to save money with a battery, you're almost certainly not going to save money with a household battery. The people who make money when you put a battery in is your electricity retailer and your local network operator, because it reduces expenses for them. And what happens with the battery, typically you won't be using energy during the evening peak from the grid, you'll be using energy from your battery. And that's when your retailer is buying the most expensive electricity they buy during the day. So you reduce the cost for the retailers by not having that demand at the evening peak with your battery. So the retailer saves money and the local network operator saves money too, because they're less likely to need to upgrade the local network infrastructure to bring more energy into the area because you've reduced energy demand at a peak time. You've got a possum running on the roof here. So I thought I'd start off with a picture of our house. It might look like it's a forest, but there's actually a house hidden in behind there somewhere. And the idea of this picture is to demonstrate that you can actually have a house that's 95% powered by solar and still have trees on that property. Our block of land is a relatively small block. It's in Kirraville. It's about 500 square metres. And we've got about 20 trees on that block. Some of them are quite big. So that's our house. This is from the other side of the house. This is our power supply. So you can see in the background one of the large trees that's in our front yard, which is a Himalayan cedar. But here on the roof over the back of the house, we've got our solar panels. There's actually 2 separate installations of solar panels there. There's the panels that are at the front on both these rows have been in place since 2007. So they were part of our initial 1.5 kilowatt peak solar system installed in 2007. Cost a fortune, cost $16,000 back then. There was an $24,000, sorry, it was $24,000, but there was an $8,000 government rebate, federal government rebate. So the cost to us was $16,000. And we only had the money to do that back then because earlier that year, my mother had died, leaving all of her children $16,000. And my wife decided that this was the best way to spend that money and honour my mother's memory. So at that time, there were no policies in Australia to encourage the uptake of solar. There was no feed-in tariff or anything like that. So this was just a decision we made because we thought, well, it's something good for the environment, and we had the money. But because other countries had a feed-in tariff, particularly Germany, what happened is demand for solar panels went up, and competition in the market to sell those panels went up and produce them, and that actually drove the cost of producing solar panels down. And over time, the cost kept coming down, so demand kept going up, so the cost kept coming down because of the competitive nature of the solar market. And it's really those government policies that encourage the uptake of solar at a time when it was expensive, which have driven the cost down and made solar now the cheapest way of generating electricity anywhere in the world. So that's our power supply. 2 rows of panels, each of 5 panels, 1.5 kilowatts, and then in behind them, there's some additional 12 panels, each of 250 watts, which we installed a decade later in 2017. This is our hot water heater. It's a heat pump hot water heater. It's the most efficient one that's available on the market in Australia and I think in the world today. That's the water tank there. It looks like a standard water tank. And this unit here, which looks like the external unit for a reverse cycle air conditioner, performs in exactly the same way as the external unit for a reverse cycle air conditioner. That's the heat pump unit. The refrigerant compound in this heat pump unit is carbon dioxide. Now, that's actually good because if that carbon dioxide gets released into the atmosphere, its global warming potential is by definition 1, but a lot of other refrigerants that are used in heat pump units, in fridges and reverse cycle air conditioners have global warming potentials in the hundreds, if not thousands. So this unit is not only the most efficient unit, it's using the most greenhouse-friendly refrigerant, and it's also the quietest unit on the market. It's a 300-litre storage tank, so it's a typical storage tank that you might use for a household of 4. This is our family car. I haven't owned a car since 1983, and my wife has never owned a car, and in fact doesn't hold a driver's licence. So there's 4 bicycles there, 1 for each of our children and 1 for Elena and myself. And Elena's bike is this fancy electric bike in the foreground here, which is really, Ed Burt mentioned it yesterday in his talk, electric bikes are a game changer. We bought this bike for Elena back in February, and it has been a real game changer for us because it now means she's very willing to accompany me on rides of 40 to 50 kilometres, travelling around the area, visiting all sorts of things that we can see together for the first time. It's made such a difference for her, and she still gets plenty of exercise riding it. And the thing that's been found globally is when people get electric bikes, what happens is more people are riding more often, and so the public health benefits, even though they get a bit of assist from the electric motor, the public health benefits are still quite significant. So I've said here, this is our family car. Who needs a Tesla? Well, we need a Tesla. So this is our Tesla Powerwall battery, which we installed in 2017. And my advice to anybody thinking of getting a Tesla is, if you're thinking of getting a Tesla, get the one without wheels. Get this one. It's cheaper than the one with wheels for a start. So this battery stores about 14 kilowatt hours of electrical energy, which is about 1.5 times our average daily demand. And one of the nice features of this Tesla battery is if there's a blackout, you automatically switch over to the battery. And so the way that works is you're generally running off the battery and the solar. But if there's not enough energy stored in the battery, you'll run off the grid. But what you can do is you can set a reserve amount in your battery and say, don't deplete the battery below this level. If you get to this level, switch over to the grid, we'll run off the grid. And then if there's a blackout, it switches over back to the battery instantaneously. You don't even know most of the time that when there's a blackout that there's been one. You only go outside and realise there's no street lighting. So it's seamless. They're such a beautiful device, these things, they work so well. I'll just point out here in the background, this green thing here is our inverter for our original 1.5 kilowatt solar system. At the time we installed that system in 2007, so this is now 14 years old. The warranties on these were 5 years, and the manufacturer of these said, oh, don't worry, this one will last at least 10 years. Well, it's lasted 14 years and it hasn't skipped a beat. But around that time, it was actually very difficult to find an inverter that would actually last beyond its 5-year warranty lifetime. The consumer electronics in them wasn't as good a quality as it is today, but they work much better now. And so and the inverters you get today will be even better and have an even longer lifetime. So let's get on to what you can do in your household. So the emissions that you have direct control over as a household are your household energy and the choices that you make there, your transport choices and your food choices. We had a very nice session earlier this week on sustainable nutrition, so I'm not going to talk about food, but with one vegan member in our household, it's certainly changed the way we eat, and we know that we've reduced our emissions from food choices, and we can probably still do more. But I'm going to talk primarily about household energy, and I don't think I'll say much about transport choices, except with a few example calculations along the way. So when you look at your household energy consumption, where are your big energy users? Well, this really depends upon where you live in Australia. So if you live in New South Wales or Queensland, your big energy sinks are hot water, transport, and then the third one is heating and cooling. If you live in Victoria or Tasmania, heating and cooling will be the biggest one for you. So on average, a household in Victoria, for instance, uses about 10 times as much energy per year for heating and cooling their household than a household in Queensland, and they use about 4 times as much energy as a household in New South Wales. But here in New South Wales, particularly in central New South Wales, we're not too far south, it's hot water and transport that use a lot of the energy in your household. So if we go through the example of water heating, I've used here just a sample calculation, 300 litres of water per day. Assume that the water comes in at 15 degrees Celsius, it's heated to 60 degrees Celsius. That will use 15 kilowatt hours of electricity per day, heating that much hot water. That amounts to 5,500 kilowatt hours per year. You can convert that to a different energy unit, megajoules, and I've done that for the sake of making comparisons with gas. So that's about 20,000 megajoules or 20 gigajoules per year. In the process, if you're just using normal electricity from the grid, you'll generate about 3 tonnes of CO2 with the CO2 intensity of our current electricity on the national electricity market. The primary energy, so this is the energy content released by the stuff that was burned to generate that electricity, is actually around 60,000 megajoules a year. So to produce 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, you release about 3 kilowatt hours of heat by burning coal. 1 kilowatt hour of that becomes electricity, the other 2 kilowatts just becomes waste heat and goes up the stack in the power station. So anyhow, just for this hot water alone, if this is how much hot water you're using each day, that would cost you around $1,650 per year using electricity, or around $660 using gas. So that's a lot of money. So it doesn't matter whether you're using electricity or gas. If you can reduce hot water usage, you're going to save money and you're going to reduce emissions. Right? And the best way of reducing hot water usage is, first of all, don't use hot water for things that don't need hot water. We've never washed our clothes in hot water, and our clothes still look all right and last as long as anybody else's. So if you're using hot water for washing, you probably don't need to. You certainly don't need to. And then the other way, of course, is to have a water-efficient shower head, because that's the next major use of hot water in the home. We have a shower head that's 9 litres a minute. That's not super efficient, but most of the old ones used to be like 20 litres a minute or more. You can get more efficient ones. There's ones that are 4.5 litres a minute, and there's even a hyper-efficient one, which is 2.7 litres a minute. But we've never built up the courage to try using one of those and think we're going to have an enjoyable shower. So we're happy sticking to the 9 litres a minute one, which is still more than twice as good as most have at present. I'll just go through transport here. If you consider a typical household, you might travel 20,000 kilometres per year if you're using a car. That'll consume around 2,000 litres of fuel. You'll produce about 4.6 tonnes of CO2. So that's more CO2 than you're producing from your hot water, by the way. When you look at the energy content of that fuel, that means you end up consuming around 70,000 megajoules of primary energy. So that's more energy than was used for your hot water, once again. So it's a significant energy user. And if you look at the price of petrol and you assume it's about $1.50 a litre, you've spent around $3,000. and that's just the fuel cost for your transport. Now, there's a bit of a rule of thumb with motor car transport that for every $1 you spend on fuel, you're going to have to end up spending about $1 on maintenance, you know, replacing tyres, doing oil changes, replacing brake pads, etc., etc. So the running costs are probably twice that, but then of course you've got the full life cycle cost of owning a car, and if you believe the NRMA, the full life cycle cost for a typical Australian car is somewhere in the range of about 80 cents to $1.20 per kilometre. So if you're travelling 20,000 kilometres a year in a car, the cost to you is actually around $20,000. If you can find a way of not needing a car, you're going to save a lot of money and in the process also reduce emissions a lot. So let's get on to gas versus electricity and why you should electrify everything. So first of all, gas. If you want to get 1 gigajoule of heat from gas, you typically have to consume about 1.1 gigajoules of gas because it's not 100% efficient to process. And this is for hot water. If you're using it for space heating, the efficiency drops further. And to get 1 gigajoule of heat, you might need to consume about 1.5 to 2 gigajoules of gas. The amount of CO2 that you produce is around 56 kilograms for every gigajoule of heat output. And the cost to you of that gas, and this varies from state to state, is about $33 a gigajoule. Right. So you've paid $33 to produce 56 kilograms of CO2 into the atmosphere. If you look at the comparison to electricity, first of all, an electric heat pump gives you more output than the electricity you put in. So for every gigajoule of electrical energy input, you get about 4 to 6 gigajoules of heat output. Typically around 4 for a good hot water heater, maybe around 6 for a reverse cycle air conditioner. Now the CO2 for our grid is around 195 kilograms of CO2 produced for every gigajoule of electricity generated. So this is assuming you're getting electricity from the electricity grid. When you take into account the efficiency of the heat pump, then this reduces quite significantly. So it's around using the heat pump to get 195 gigajoules of energy, you might need to use 49 gigajoules of CO2 because you're getting 4 gigajoules of energy for every gigajoule of electrical input. But if you run that heat pump from solar, then your emissions are dropped to 0. Right? So a lot of people in the gas industry will tell you that gas is a way of reducing emissions. It is if you ignore the existence of heat pumps. Right? So the heat pump alone will reduce your emissions, and if you run that heat pump from solar, then it will eliminate your emissions. So if you look at the cost of it, if you're getting that gigajoule of heat from a heat pump, it costs you from between about $14 to $21, depending upon whether the efficiency is, you know, a factor of 4 or a factor of 6. And if you're getting the electricity from solar and you actually take into account the fact that that solar electricity isn't free, you have to pay for it, then it's between $5 and $3.30 it costing you for each gigajoule of heat with solar compared to the 33 with gas. So with solar, you can eliminate your emissions and you can reduce your marginal cost by a factor of 10 for heating. So gas only wins if you ignore the existence of heat pumps and you ignore the fugitive emissions in the gas supply cycle. So the message is then electrify space and hot water heating using heat pumps. What is a heat pump? I haven't mentioned too much about it, and I'll just go over this very briefly. What it does is it uses electricity, compresses a refrigerant compound, runs that refrigerant compound through a system of heat exchangers so it can exchange energy between the refrigerant compound and some part of the environment. The energy that's transferred to the refrigerant in this process is larger than the electrical energy that's used, and that's the thing that gives heat pumps their advantage. If you're using the energy that you pay for is the energy in the electricity, the energy services you get, the heating and cooling you get, which is greater than the energy you used. So when you use it for cooling, the energy services you get is the energy taken in by the refrigerant, and that's larger than the electrical energy used. If you're using this for heating, then the electrical services you get is the sum of the electrical energy you paid for and the energy taken in by the refrigerant. And that's why for heating, reverse cycle air conditioners are the lowest emissions and the most energy efficient form of heating we've got. So you have a heat pump in your home already. It's called a fridge. It pumps heat from the inside, the fridge, the contents, to the outside, which is your house. So fridges actually cool the contents, but they heat your house by more than they cool the contents. Air conditioners as well are heat pumps, and of course the heat pump hot water heater is another heat pump. I won't go over that in too much more detail. So now I'll go over to our experience living with batteries and solar, or as I've termed it here, how we learned to love Elon Musk, but not really. But at least we think he's not a complete jerk. And the thing is, if you want to make important change in the world rapidly, sometimes you've got to be a bit of a jerk. So I'll go on to this slide. And one of the things I like about our Tesla Powerwall battery is the app that comes with it and all the software and stuff. So this is this slide shows you month by month 1 year of solar generation. So it's for the year 2020, January, February, March. So you can see our solar output is highest in summer, it drops into winter, and then it comes back up again. For that year, 2020, we generated nearly 6,000 kilowatt hours of electricity from our solar panels. And down the bottom, it tells you where that energy went. 24% of the solar energy that we generated went directly into being used in the home. 33% of it went into the battery and was stored in the battery, and 43% of it, the bulk of it, was fed into the grid. So even with the battery, we are still feeding energy into the grid. So that solar system we've got, 4.5 kilowatts peak, generates 6,000 kilowatt hours per year. That still allows us to put nearly half of that into the grid. So we're generating much more electricity than we need. The next graph shows you the home usage month by month. Again, starting in January, going through to December. And you can see that our household usage is quite low, or relatively low, in summer and autumn. Late autumn, it starts to go up and it peaks there in August when we're using our reverse cycle air conditioner a lot for space heating. We have 2 of them. And then it drops off again as we go back into the warmer months. So we're using the reverse cycle air cons in summertime as well for cooling, but that's requiring much less energy than the heating does in wintertime. So our home usage, if you look at it, is a bit over 3,000 kilowatt hours. So we're using slightly more than half the energy, half as much energy as we generate. When you go down the bottom here, it tells you where the energy that was used in that household came from. So 44% of our energy usage was directly from solar. And that's partly as a result of us having a heat pump, which heats up during the day when the solar panels are operating. 50% of the energy that we use in our household came via the battery. I mean, it was generated by the solar, but it came via the battery after being stored there. And just 6% came from the grid. Right? So our grid usage is quite a small proportion of our total electricity consumption. The next slide just shows you what the battery did. So this is the energy discharged from the battery. It's about 1,600 kilowatt hours for the year. And it just tells you down the bottom here that 100% of that energy discharged from the battery went into the home and none of it went into the grid. Now, what some of the electricity network operators are doing now is offering schemes where they'll install solar and a battery in your home, but they're controlling the operation of it. So when it suits them, they will discharge your battery into the grid to reduce the need for them to buy peak electricity. But our Tesla Powerwall isn't part of such a system at present, so 100% of the energy that goes into our battery comes back into our home. And then finally, this last chart shows you our usage, our energy transfers to and from the grid for the year. So these grey bars, if they're going downwards like this, that's energy that went into the grid, and the little bits that come up show you the energy that comes from the grid into the household. So you can see over the summer months, there's very little energy coming from the grid. And then in wintertime, that's when we take the most energy from the grid. But even then in wintertime, every month through winter, we are still putting more energy into the grid than we take from it. This one here tells you the maximum that we imported in any month from the grid was about 53 kilowatt hours, and the maximum we exported in any month was about 305 kilowatt hours. So that's what happens over the course of a year. And I'll just finish by showing you quickly what happens in one day. So this is for Thursday, the 13th of October. So this was a bit over a week ago. On that day, our usage was 8.2 kilowatt hours. This graph shows you here the power consumption in the house from midnight to midnight. Right. This solid blue block here, this is the time when our heat pump hot water heater came on. Right? So the 8.2 kilowatt hours that we used, this shows how that energy consumption was distributed during the day. And down here it tells you that on that day, of that 8.2 kilowatt hours, 4.2 kilowatt hours of it was supplied from solar, 3.4 kilowatt hours from the battery, and 0.6 kilowatt hours came from the grid. And then it breaks that down as a percentage here. So on that day, 8% of energy consumption came from the grid, 51% from solar. This is the solar output for that day. It's not very good. It was a cloudy day. So there were periods here before midday and after midday when the solar dropped quite down because clouds came overhead. We generated 15.1 kilowatt hours of electricity. 28% of that went into the home, 72% into the battery, and 1% to the grid. And then this last figure here shows you what was happening with the battery. So when these green shaded bits go below the horizontal line, that's energy being stored in the battery. So the solar was generating more energy than we needed, so it puts the excess into the battery. And these bits coming up here, these were the shady parts of the day where the solar wasn't generating enough and we used energy from the battery. And then the graph down the bottom just shows you how the levels stored in the battery varied throughout the day. And it wasn't a great day, and we never actually got quite up to 100% in the battery that day. So that's our typical day of life with the battery. Transport, I'm not going to say any more about transport. I just thought I'd take this little figure. It was put out by the organisation We're Cycling UK. You might know there's a bit of a fuel shortage in the UK at present. So they put this out as a tip for how you can save fuel on shorter journeys, and they all involve using the bicycle. So the summary, I went through that at the beginning, so hopefully you know all that. But the main message is you can actually reduce your emissions, save money, improve your quality of life. And it's just so nice never having to worry about blackouts, I tell you. But if you don't have the money to put in solar or buy heat pumps, then you can just reduce your hot water usage, which saves you money and reduces emissions, and you can try to reduce your car usage. If you have gas, get rid of it, replace it with solar and heat pumps. There's an upfront cost, but the savings that you make over time will more than pay off the loan that you might have to take out for that upfront investment. And that's the important thing. If you don't have the money, the savings you make are enough to pay off the loan, right? So you'll end up ahead. You'll pay off the loan and you'll still be getting the advantage of the solar and heat pumps after you've paid off the loan. The solar PV, the reason it's so good is when you work out the real cost of that energy, it's less than a quarter of the cost of grid electricity. If you go with the solar PV and you have a heat pump hot water heater, then use the timer function on it. So you know it's going to be heating up when your solar is generating. That maximises your solar consumption. And actually, if you do it, even if you have a battery, it prolongs the life of your battery because you're putting less energy into it and taking less energy out of it. And John will probably tell you why that saves you on battery life later on. If you have the money for a battery, don't think it's going to save you money, but it will help the environment. It will help your local electricity retailer, your local network operator, and it will also help your neighbours. So it's a feel-good factor, but certainly don't do it thinking you're going to save money.
Thanks, George.
I'll stop sharing now if I can find the tab for that.
Thank you so much. Some really, helpful, practical advice, and such an important conversation given that we are at home way more than we used to be. So what we might do is move on to Jonathan, just looking at the time, and then hopefully we might have some time for questions at the end, or if you do have questions for George, just pop them in the chat and he'll answer them as we go through. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks very much for that, Belinda, and hopefully you should see my screen now. I've got a thumbs up. So thanks very much, Belinda, Nancy, and Leah for organising this and for inviting me along today. I'll take a little bit of a different tack to George, hopefully this will be interesting to you. Please, as you've been doing, as I've seen with in the chat, please feel free to pop some questions in there. I've got it open next to me so I can see if there's any questions that go along. Otherwise, just stop me. We might do this as a little bit more of a choose your own adventure than I had originally planned. So we'll kind of wing it and see what interests everyone, and we can skip over bits that might not be all that interesting. So from a sort of a very large scale perspective, one of the things, so I'm a researcher here at the University of Wollongong. I work in energy storage research and energy research more generally across a number of different sort of scales. And so this is a bit of a teaser question to frame how some of the research that's going on at UOW, and in fact, how energy systems, electricity systems in general are, some of the problems that are facing electricity systems and the opportunities at the moment, that all of these systems here, all of these supply chains here, you've got oil, you've got Parmesan cheese, you've got feedlots, you've got, all of these different systems, all of them have storage built into the supply chain. So, all around Australia, there are strategic reserves of oil and, petrol and all those sorts of things that have, but even at a petrol station, there is a large tank buried underground that has, thousands of litres or tens of thousands of litres of fuel. So at every point along the supply chain for a lot of commodities, there is storage. Electricity is the only commodity where there's no storage, and I've got a little asterisk there because it's not really true. And as George has sort of shown, there's certainly ways with either battery storage or other clever ways of storing energy. But by and large, there's not a week's worth of electricity stored up sitting around our grid in Australia. An electron gets electricity gets generated and it gets used straight away, and that's that's one of the difficulties in the electricity supply system, whether you're talking about it from an individual home. So if you've got a solar system on your roof, as George was saying, if you're not using it, then and you don't have a method of storing it, then it's going straight into the grid for someone else to use it. So I guess that's a bit of a framing of how I've approached today, or what I wanted to say today. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of where we're going from here. So in the interest of time, I'll burn through this pretty quickly, but these are sort of the key items that I wanted to touch on today. So looking at energy storage and batteries, particularly drilling down into some nitty-gritty for the homes, depending on whether people are interested in sort of, drilling into what battery research or energy storage research is going on at UOW, we can certainly do that, or we can skip over and have more time to sort of, to have a more Q&A session, considering I think a lot of the people here are actually from UOW, so I imagine, that may be covering ground that everyone already knows. So just very quickly, one thing that's always nice to do is to, because energy and power are often used interchangeably when you're talking about things like batteries or solar panels, and you may have heard George talking before about his solar system has a 4.5 kilowatt peak power rating, whereas his energy storage system, his Tesla battery, is 14 kilowatt hours. And the two things are fundamentally different. So energy, when you're talking about energy, you're talking about capacity or quantity. So, it's an amount, it's a unit. Often the terminology or the units that are used are watt hours, kilowatt hours, joules, gigajoules, as you would have heard in the earlier presentation. In comparison, power is talking about rate or throughput. So, a dribble out of your out of a garden hose or a dam outlet there that looks like it's the idea of the rate or the throughput is what we're talking about when we're talking about power. So how quickly you can move energy in and out of a system is your power, whereas energy is the capacity. And units for power are watts, kilowatts, megawatts, horsepower, those sorts of things. So just keep in mind that those are, two completely separate concepts. And so you can have a battery that can output at a certain power, so 5,000 watts, 5 kilowatts, and it may have a storage capacity, energy capacity of 10 kilowatt hours. So, those two things are not sort of interchangeable, or they're important to know the what both of those numbers or what both of those terms mean. I'll go through this quite quickly, but it's also a good idea to have sort of the idea that energy can be stored in a number of different mechanisms. And, one of the ones that George was talking about before and was quite, is quite a good way of storing energy is in hot water. So heating up water at a time that is convenient to you, or if you've got excess energy, like if you've got your solar panels generating during the day, is a great way to store energy beyond the idea of using all of these other technologies. So there's, if you group them under sort of the way that you store them, so you can compress air, you can, pumped hydro is a way of storing energy, all of these different things. Electrochemical, so batteries are the ones that are most available to us for residential applications. And so we'll focus on those today, but just being mindful that often, there are many ways to skin the cat if you're looking to, if your end goal is to be more energy efficient or to bring your energy use more inside the locus of your own control. So you can do things like using hot water and energy storage or phase change materials and to store your energy, rather than saying it's a battery or it's nothing, for example. But really, one of the things that I wanted to sort of suggest is, if you are thinking about energy storage for your own home, it's really important to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve, because there's lots of different things that you can do with a battery-based energy storage, and some of them we've heard about from George. So the idea of bringing more of your energy consumption inside your own fence, and being more self-sufficient. But there's also the idea of using a battery as a virtual power plant. So you can you can charge your battery and then sell the power to energy retailers and make a profit. In theory, it's not quite that easy. You can go completely off grid if that's, if your intent is to go completely off grid, then there's certainly ways to do that as well with solar and batteries. Lots of other different reasons why you might consider having energy storage, including because you want to, because you think it'd be cool to do, because you want to show off to your neighbors. All of these are very good ideas, or, particularly relevant for the forum that we're in, reducing carbon emissions, as George has given us some great numbers around. But being clear on what it is that you're trying to achieve allows you to design, or allows you to go to someone who's going to design a system for you and sort of pick and choose the important items, and then the important reasons why you're looking at energy storage. Because as George mentioned before, if you want to do it to save money, if you want to do it to reduce the overall cost of electricity, there's a lot of, it's very much a knife edge sort of decision there. And we'll have a look in a minute at a chart and some resources that show you just how knife edge that is at the moment. So that's sort of, we understand, or, it's a good idea to have, when you're going into saying, well, I've got solar panels on my roof, or I want to do an entire system, what it is that you want to actually achieve with that system. When you talk about residential scale energy storage, you'll be talking about energy capacities around 1 to 20 kilowatt hours total in size. So the Tesla Powerwall is about 14 kilowatt hours. They can be either AC or DC. That's not really important from a usage point of view, but it is important from a system design point of view, and whether it's going to interoperate with an existing system, or whether you're going to need to sort of purchase additional hardware, additional inverters, additional switching and control systems in order to make it interoperate with an existing system, or across brands and those sorts of things as well. One of the notes that, one of the little asterisks that George set off in my mind before as well, is that batteries, is the process of storing energy and releasing energy from the batteries is an electrochemical process. And so that's a process that has, that the battery breaks down, and there is a limited lifetime of batteries. Typically it's a 10-year warranty. So, if you were to buy a Tesla Powerwall or something like that, they're either based on years, sometimes on cycles, although that's it's a pretty arbitrary number, and so that's not necessarily being used, or that's being phased out, or energy throughput. So how many kilowatt hours have you put through your battery? And once you reach a certain number, that's it, your battery's at the end of life. And so every kilowatt hour you put into your battery or pull out of your battery costs. And so keeping in mind that process, and that's a finite lifetime for your battery, is an important part of the economics of a battery system. So that said, around 140,000 Australians, give or take, the numbers aren't particularly easy to come by, have installed residential battery energy storage systems. So there's about 2.1 million solar PV systems on houses around Australia. So 140,000 batteries is not a huge number of those solar systems with batteries, but it's certainly, there were only 6,000 odd in 2016. So that number is rising quite significantly. So there are some really, really great resources. So if you say, all right, I've decided exactly what I want to do, what I want my battery system for. I know sort of these limitations, or I know the fact that we're going to be talking about warranties, and I'm going to have an idea of how this is going to fit in with an existing system, or it's going to be an all brand new system. There are some great resources out there then to arm yourself with information before you go to your electrical installer or contractors to actually implement a system. So I'm not going to spruik anyone in particular, although Solar Quotes have a great battery storage comparison table. So this website, solarquotes.com.au, where they list all of the commercially available battery systems in Australia and tell you all about their warranties and cost per kilowatt hours and all these sorts of things. So that's a really great resource to be able to understand what is out there on the market and what you could implement in your home. There's also some other great resources looking at the payback periods, and this is what I think George was alluding to before as well, that if you look at it from a purely economic standpoint, these payback periods, so this is going from 2018 through to the middle of 2021, and these payback periods are still not reaching the level where you pay $15,000 for your battery and you don't make that $15,000 back before the warranty ends. So, but these numbers are getting a little bit closer, or becoming a little bit more reasonable. But of course, that's not the only reason why you might want to put a battery in. But it's very important to ensure that you're comfortable with that idea that this isn't a purely economic decision. This is now an economic decision, and I value the resilience of not having my power go out when there's a blackout, all those sorts of things. And there's these different value stacks that you need to appreciate beyond a purely economic argument there. So mindful of the time, either we can have a quick look at some of the energy storage research that's going on at UOW, or we can skip to sort of basically just discussing those sorts of things. I've got a few questions that, frequently asked questions that often come up that might be of interest to you around, how much lithium is actually in a lithium-ion battery pack. So I guess a bit of a choose your own adventure here as to whether you want the spiel about UOW or whether we sort of skip to that. So if I can get maybe one or two people to give me an indication, and then we'll assume that everyone else agrees with that.
Maybe hit the frequently asked questions, John, that'd be great.
Right, okay, so I'll just, so Q&A maybe. Okay, so yep, we've got the Q&A. So I'll just pop through these quite quickly. So these slides are, if anyone's interested in actually looking at some of these questions, please let me know and I can make the slides available to you as well. So from what I'll just say very quickly is these are sort of the top line ideas that I think are coming down the line in terms of future of batteries. Lithium is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It's been under commercial, it was first commercialized. The first lithium-ion battery was commercialized in 1991. So there's almost 30 years or over 30 years of development into not only the technology, but also the supply chains and the products and all those sorts of things. So lithium will be a dominant force in energy storage for not only for Apple Watches and iPods and AirPods and all those sorts of things, but all the way through to large scale energy storage as well. for the near to medium future, I think. Certainly there's no other energy storage technology that is orders of magnitude better just around the corner. Costs will continue to fall, but there's also a lot of new technology development, because if anyone can eat lithium-ion batteries lunch, then there's a lot of money to be made there as well, and a lot of good to be done as well. I think one of the key things that, particularly at UAW, and I will do a little bit of spruiking here, is that UAW is looking, with the Energy Futures Network, to not only talk about the technology involved in energy storage, but also, engaging with customers, engaging with consumers, engaging with people, so that they become active players, active participants in their energy future. So rather than being sort of passive consumers, actually forearming themselves with knowledge, but also, taking control of their technology as well. So I guess, so are there any questions before I launch into my little Q&As?
Thanks, Jonathan. Has anyone got any burning questions, in case everyone's going to leave exactly at 1?
Could I put one in?
Yeah, of course.
Stuart here, UAW. Just on that battery question, so you're saying there's, the economic argument is borderline for it, but is it still needed, or does it still have a role in terms of smoothing your supply and ensuring continuity and all of that, or are you generally producing, more than enough for that not to be an issue? Or possibly another way to ask that is from George: if you didn't have your battery, would you be using any more of the grid than you do currently?
Well, I can answer that second question, Stuart. Yeah, certainly if we did not have the battery, we would be using more energy from the grid, because a lot of our battery use is overnight when, we're in the evening when the solar has stopped generating, particularly in wintertime. So at night time, we are cooking off the battery normally, and we'd be cooking off the grid if that were not the case. But I think one of the interesting things, though, is that actually makes it, the fact that we have the battery makes it better for everybody else, because we reduce demand at what is a peak time in the evening when everybody comes home and starts cooking. But certainly if we didn't have the battery, we'd use more grid electricity. But that still doesn't make it a financially attractive proposition.
I guess that's still factored into the economic calculations, that you're paying more for that grid.
Well, we don't pay more for the grid. So we don't have time of use pricing, right, for consumers in Australia. We have, in effect, we have time of use pricing for the retailers, because they're buying it from the generators from the national electricity market. Yep. And that price fluctuates enormously during the day, and quite often, particularly in the summer evening peaks, we might be paying 30 cents a kilowatt hour for the grid, but they might be paying 14,000 cents a kilowatt hour to buy it from the generator.
Okay.
That's something that particularly solar systems, so there's a phenomenon known as the duck curve, whereby the fact that people are generating either themselves with rooftop mounted solar panels, or even larger solar systems generating during the day, and they're all generating about the same time, and they're all stopping generating about the same time, that has a massive impact on the aggregate demand on the energy system, or the electricity system in general, which has huge sort of headaches for those generators. So as the more people get their energy from solar during the middle of the day, your coal-fired power plant isn't required at night, during that day, but it is still required at night, and everyone's getting home about the same time as the solar panels are stopping generating, because the sun's going down. And so there's this huge ramp up required of other generation technologies, like coal-fired power plants, like all of the other power plants that are kicking around, and that's an impact on the efficiency of those systems as well. So batteries being able to minimize, as George is saying, being able to minimize the differential between the low point and the high point of requiring these older technologies that much more prefer to be running at the same output day in, day out, 24 hours a day, is a significant impact there as well.
Okay, thanks.
There's a question from Scott around local community battery resources. And that's something that's a really, that's one of the really great research areas at the moment that UOW is involved in quite heavily, because that's where do you put where is the most optimal place to put a battery? Does everyone on a street have a battery, or is there a battery kiosk at the end of the street that everyone uses, or is there a battery per suburb, or is there a battery per region, or where is the best point to put that capacity for most benefit? And it also, the question is also, well, what do you define benefit as? So George is getting great benefit in riding through, one of the benefits that he's getting is riding through blackouts, for example, or, knowing that he is in control of the, it's all within his fence. Whereas, so that's one benefit there. And there's also economic benefits that go along with that, but there's also inefficiencies in every single household having a battery. And so where you get off that bus in terms of, where is the most appropriate place to put batteries is a really open question at the moment. There's a lot of interest in community batteries, but there's also a lot of difficulty in sort of pricing those appropriately, all of the issues that come along with the tragedy of the commons. And so who owns them, who maintains them, all these sorts of questions that are not only economic questions, but also get to the heart of how people use their energy, how people feel about sort of owning assets versus leasing them or paying energy providers to store energy in the battery. What about if you've got a bigger solar system than your neighbor? Well, he's using my energy, all those sorts of things. There's some pretty complex questions to unpack that aren't only technical issues, but also sort of societal issues, or, there's a lot more going on than simply, how many kilowatt hour, what's the most appropriate kilowatt hour to put at the end of a street or something like that. Does that answer your question, Scott?
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for asking those questions. Thank you. It's unfortunate that we've run out of time. I think one of my big takeaways from global climate change this week is to definitely schedule about, not too long, but probably be about 15 minutes more per session, I think, because the questions are really important and really interesting as well. I have just learned so much this session. I thank both of you so much, not only for your time, but yeah, just the time in preparing your slides and the information that's presented to us. Your presentations gelled beautifully together. So you could do a tag team and and go on a road show, I think. But also this session followed the Sustainable Buildings Research Centre presentation around the Innovation Hub and heating and cooling and home design. So yeah, worked really nice with that as well, actually. It's such an important topic moving forward, especially as our earth gets hotter, and heat is a major health issue as we move forward. So this concept of cooling and heating is critical moving forward. And I don't think our housing design policies are anywhere near up to scratch for where we need them to be, but lots of really good discussions, and thank you. Do you have any parting thoughts, George?
Well, only a couple really. So, I mean, I really need to get over to the Innovation Campus and see the work that John and his team are doing over there, but also to visit the SBRC and see what's changed since I was last there, which was quite a few years ago. There's so much interesting stuff happening now at UOW. And I think the key thing is, how do we translate all that stuff into change in the community? And that's I think the big thing we need to try and work out a way of doing. It's interesting at present that you do have energy retailers and network providers like Energy Australia that are starting to come up with innovative offers. So if you're in the network that's serviced by Energy Australia and your household uses more than 7,500 kilowatt hours of electricity a year, they will come to your place and install a solar panel system and a battery, and you'll sign up onto a contract where you guaranteed to pay for the energy from that you paid less than your current rate. And then at the end of 7 years, the system becomes entirely yours and you get the energy from it for nothing. But during that 7-year period, Energy Australia then can control when that battery discharges into the grid, because they're using this as a trial to see how they can save money to solar and batteries. And that's what, when I said in my presentation, if you install a battery, the person who saves is not you, it's your retailer and your network operator. They realise this, and they're looking at ways of bringing some of that savings, extending the amount of savings they make by bringing solar and batteries onto more people's households. So there is a zero cost option for people. And I think over time, more retailers and network operators will be doing this. So more people will get to have the benefit of the battery in their home without paying anything up front for it themselves.
That's great. Yeah, such an important discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along today and for attending all the other sessions. And yeah, thank you so much. And hopefully lots of actions will come from this.